Facebook and make sure it is live. And I think we are live. Esther, if you can check, got it. It says we're live. All right.
Checking for you now, Matt.
Okay, great. Thanks, Esther. All right, well, let's get started. So I'd just like to welcome everyone to this special Mental Health Month event, facing the challenges of young men's mental health. My name's Peter Lennon. I'm the Business Development Manager for Mental Health Foundation ACT. I'm also Program Manager for Reconxted, which is our Rites of Passage program. We have a great panel today, but I first want to just start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we are meeting today. I also acknowledge the cost to those traditional owners of sharing this land with us. For most of us, we're on Ngunnawal land, but for a few, we come from other lands. PJ, what lands are you coming on from?
I come from the Dharawal Nation.
Cheers, mate.
Dharawal Nation.
Thanks, mate. And Lockie, you?
I'm on Wajak Noongar Boodja, so in the southwest of WA.
Cheers, mate. And I know my boss, Angie Ingram, she's in Cooma. So if anyone else is coming from other lands, if they would just want to put it in the chat section, just so we probably acknowledge that would be great. I'd like to pay respect to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people with us here today. And given that it is Mental Health Month, I'd also like to acknowledge anyone with a lived experience of mental illness joining us today. So welcome, everyone. Just quickly introduce our panelists today. We have Martin Fisk. Martin is CEO of Canberra's, probably Canberra's better known community organisation, Menslink. Martin, welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Hello, everyone.
We have Dr. Amar Dhall. Amar is a psychotherapist, and he is Centre Director of the, I think, newly created Canberra Trauma and Wellbeing Centre, along with his partner, Sandy Farrak. Amar, welcome.
Afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Ed. Hello, everyone.
Lockie Cooke. Lockie Cooke is an entrepreneur. He has a background in Rites of Passage. He's a founder at iYarn, which is an incredibly interesting Australian-developed app designed to help people stay connected and facilitate conversations. Lockie, welcome.
Kaya, I'm Noongar Boodja. It's still the morning over here in WA.
Yeah. Cheers, mate. Thanks for that. And finally, just to demonstrate nepotism is alive and well, we have PJ Lennon, which PJ is my 17-year-old son. He has recently returned from a Rites of Passage camp with me. We've both returned from that Rites of Passage camp. Since then, he's gone on to do some leadership training around the Rites of Passage framework. PJ, welcome.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
PJ's wearing a hat, if I could tell everyone, because this is a common narrative running around at the moment, because Mum tried to cut his hair recently.
And it went amazing.
Thanks, mate. Hey, PJ, we might start with you.
Okay.
Just quickly before we do, I just want to offer up a few frames. We've got an hour and 15 minutes, and it's hard to kind of tackle everything that's going to come up. So we're going to do our best to get a bit of, breadth to this discussion. If anyone's got any questions, feel free to put them in the comments section. If you're following on Zoom, if you're watching live on Facebook, you can post questions there as well. And we've already got a question, have we? I'm not sure where that is. It's going to be very hard because I'm watching different screens. So Esther, you might just put it into the comment section. But yeah, if you do have any questions, please raise them either in the comment section on Zoom or in the comments on Facebook. Roughly, we're going to talk about kind of what we're seeing around young men's mental health. We're going to kind of postulate why we're seeing that, and then we're going to offer some solutions. And I think that's probably enough to go. And if you want the conversation to continue afterwards, I suggest you get onto Facebook, onto our Reconnected Facebook page, and join the conversation there. All right, PJ, let's start with you. And because I guess the elephant in the room a bit at the moment is we're in the middle of this COVID pandemic. This conversation we could have had 2 years ago. We had all the same challenges, and we could have it again in another 2 years, and we'll probably have the same issues. But tell me where you're at. How has the whole COVID epidemic been for you? What's consuming your thoughts lately? Yeah, how are you sitting?
Well, COVID's kind of been like a bit of a just like kind of put my life in this little box. There's not much, I can only go, well, right now we just have Freedom Day, so we can actually do things again. But during the last 2 months, I haven't been able to see any friends, and haven't been really able to connect with anyone. I've been only really connecting with myself and my family, which is good. But and a lot of my friends have been struggling a lot because they live far away and they can't see anyone because they're locked up in their little local government areas. And for me personally, it's been pretty hard, not only for myself, but just to see my friends struggling for the last 2-3 months and not really being able to do anything about it.
Yeah, right. And just to explain that a bit more, the PJ goes to Kirrawee High, which is in the southern suburbs, Sutherland Shire area of Sydney, and some of his mates come from outside that LGA, and they just haven't been able to catch up at all. Lots of texting, I guess, lots of group chats, but nothing replaces catching up face to face. And I can now see questions. Yeah, Karen is having terrible internet problems. Yes, this session will be recorded. It's going live on Facebook, so there'll be a recording there, and we'll be putting up the recording on our newly created YouTube channel, newly to be created YouTube channel. I might just jump over to you. So forget about COVID. Let's move on away from COVID and just talk about boys in general. What are you seeing around mental health with young boys, before you guys intervene?
One thing we see a lot with young guys, and in fact adult men, is a lot of the time it will generally be an external event that might tip them from being pretty healthy mentally, pretty mentally fit, resilient, and then all of a sudden into a whole world of despair or anxiety or whatever it is. And those events, if I went through our last 1,000 get help requests, I could tell you that it'd be bullying at school, relationship breakdown, getting in trouble with the law, fighting with family, or losing a job. Or often multiple of those 5. And I think the risk we have with young guys, and this was brought out by the recent Mission Australia study or survey into young people's mental health around the country, is young guys will often feel really embarrassed about asking for help. I'm a 50-something-year-old bloke. I still feel embarrassed asking for help, and it's a constant effort for me to go, Marty, it is actually okay to ask for help sometimes. But there's the embarrassment of asking for help, and there's this thing that we have as guys that we're supposed to be able to deal with it ourselves. Now, whether that's being stoical or whether that's being a problem solver or whatever it is, those two things combined really make the problem worse. You know, I myself, I've had relationship breakdowns, I've lost jobs, I've been bullied at school, I've been bullied in workplaces. I've had, you know, a whole range of those issues. And it's when I don't reach out for help that those issues start to compound and get bigger and bigger and bigger. And that, I think, is where the real risk we have of moving from a healthy response to some traumatic event. You know, if you're getting bullied at school, it's normal to feel scared. It's normal to feel anxious. If you've had a death in the family or a relationship breakdown, it's normal to feel sad. But if you don't put up your hand and get some advice from somebody who's maybe got some lived experience, who's been through that, can give you some tips on how to get through it, or a professional like Dr. Amar, then you're going to make that problem bigger and longer. And that's where we see the real risks to young fellas come in.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. And Lockie, some of what Martin is saying there would ring true to you, because you have a background in elite sport, and I'm thinking that you've seen plenty of that personally you. And I'm just warning you, you're on mute, so you better take yourself off mute. There we go.
Yeah, well, you know, firstly, it's great to be part of this dialogue, and I guess, you know, you mentioned the point around being like elite sport. Like for me in elite sport, you have all these wraparound services for you. You got the psychologist, physiotherapist, everything. And then all of a sudden you get an injury and all of a sudden you're not part of the program, and then it goes. And all of a sudden you're just left out in a bit of the dark, and you're like, oh, to your own devices. And all of a sudden it's not convenient. Everything isn't all at that one hub where you got your gym, where you got everything there. That was where I first experienced my first mental health real challenges. I felt like it just all of a sudden just got cut off. And that was quite difficult. But just to the point around reaching out for support, I was just this morning at a breakfast, and Helen Milroy, who was Australian of the Year for Western Australia, spoke along with the Commissioner for Children and Young People. And Commissioner for Children and Young People said one of these interesting stats around the challenges about getting who the people that young people are reaching out to. And the number one person who all the young people are reaching out to is their friend's mother, which is I found that quite interesting. And then it's the friend. And parents are like actually really low down the ladder around priorities around who they're going to reach out to. And it kind of got me really thinking a lot about, Peter, with our rite of passage work and the importance of the mentoring and having good people outside of your direct family to be and step into that role of guardianship. And I think about I've been lucky to be adopted by an Indigenous family up in the Kimberley, and the whole kinship system is based around my godfather, the person who takes me through law, will be that mentor for me as that guardian, not the direct line of parenting. So this is cultures and traditions been doing for millennia. And I think in this day and age, we need to bring that more into it. It's more the community that's raising that person rather than the direct parents themselves. Yeah,
great. Look, you've jumped way ahead. We're going to be talking about that definitely later. No, good. No, it's really important because I think that's a real big challenge for us. So I agree. I might come to you quickly, and I. Just to let you know, and others, I recently joined a Facebook group around men's mental health, and I've been shocked by the amount of despair, hopelessness, but also the lack of self-awareness. Although I'm also acknowledging my judgment around that, but I think there's a lack of self-awareness there, and I'm wondering to what extent that kind of lack of or I'm wondering about the extent you see that lack of self-efficacy play out with clients that you might see.
Sure. Thanks for the question. Look, I think there's a couple of points here. The first is the nature of trauma, and as you've already spoken to, it's been a very challenging couple of years, just in terms of pandemic, and then on top of that, there was also the Black Lives Matter movement that I've seen impact certain groups a lot. Then there's the pressure of the lack of socialization that's been spoken about, and then even families being stuck at home, and that then, particularly where there is strong culture, like I think Lockie made a great point about culture and where it can almost be a shield and uplift, but I think there can be aspects of many cultures that also force people into a particular identity. So that process of kind of laying out a path can be really good for some people. And then, if I was to think of some of my clients, some people from East Asian backgrounds, for example, where the family structure can be very strong and carry with it a lot of obligation, can also really limit people's ability for the expression of self and really being able to take on the aspects of life that would bring about self-efficacy. So that's point number one. I guess point number two is it's really related to the formation of trauma and the fact that I think a lot of people that form trauma responses at a young age, and trauma is a bit of a buzzword in mental health at the moment, but I think the key takeout is it's not a dirty word. It doesn't speak to a lack of capacity. These are automatic survival behaviors that young people pick up and then potentially weave in and think that this is actually their personality. So actually getting the kind of support, and it's already been spoken to, and I like the theme that's emerging, is it's encouraging authentic, vulnerable communication and connection with people, whether it's peers or friends, mothers, however that looks, but really getting an assembly of a network of support where there can be real conversation with people is kind of the way through. But yeah, it's certainly a problem at the moment.
Yeah, thanks. And I liked how you started that response, because it is easy to generalize and say, hey, we just need to have a strong community. But as you say, sometimes that strong community, that strong identity around that community can also be a roadblock for some. So that makes a good point.
Yeah, or lateral violence as well that can happen in community as well. So just being alive to this and supporting, I think, one of the things that I've seen, working with the young people with whom I have, is supporting, critical questioning and inquiry of elders and kind of making a distinction between eldership and olders, and really looking to find that resonance as a really important part of the process as well. Yeah, nice. And I've got a question here from Josh. Josh, just before I get to you, I just want to say from a rites of passage point of view, I think what we often see is, boys who were once, happy, joyful, gregarious boys, seemingly overnight becoming, moody and withdrawn and unsociable. That's often the sort of things we see, and some of the boys that come into a rites of passage program. I just quickly read this question from Josh Vaughan, and the question's to Martin, and thanks, Josh, for letting me know who's the question for. And Josh says, we are seeing a marked increase in young people identifying their own concerns regarding anxiety and or depression, which we know leads to school refusal, isolation, and declining mental health. Are your mentors experiencing the same, and how are they supporting the young Menslink guys?
Yeah, Josh, one of the problems we're seeing, and I think our embrace of the online world, the marketing of the online world to our young fellas in particular, as well as lockdown, are creating this super vicious cycle. Now, whether it's social media or gaming platforms, they really start to create this world in which really negative behaviour is celebrated. I know of one of our young guys just gets really, really agitated when he's playing games because the culture that he's in is all about sledging, which, as we know from the in-person world, sledging is pretty common in sport. Just look at our first grade footballers and cricketers, etc., etc., etc. Horse jockeys and all of that sort of stuff. They're constantly putting each other down in a race to get ahead. But a lot of the time in a team sport, you've got your teammates around you. In the online world, you don't have that. And so you start to get this increasing view that the world is maybe against you. And you're not able to, as PJ said, you're not able to connect with your mates in a proper, in-depth world. And so we know that starts this vicious cycle. I know of one young guy who was literally in his bedroom for 23 hours every day. Think about that. An hour outside of his bedroom, and the furthest he travelled was to the kitchen and to the bathroom, and that was it. Really, really hard once you start going down that cycle. So we are really encouraging our young guys, connect with a counsellor online, go for a walk. And I think that's so important. We encourage our mentors and sometimes even our counsellors, if there's a particular thing, let's just go for a walk. Let's not do it online. Let's not do it on a social media platform or messenger or whatever. And I think that makes a huge difference. I know I'm an old bloke and I worry about the online world. It's incredibly convenient. And we would not be all together without the online world and Pete, but it does lack depth, I find, compared to in-person connections, which is why we're encouraging our mentors to go for walks. And come Monday in the ACT, we'll be doing face-to-face counselling appointments and getting back to those connections. But sometimes, if we're used to not connecting face-to-face, the thought of making that first step is really hard. It's a big barrier. So just talking to young guys about the first step might feel uncomfortable, but the second one will feel better, and the third and the fourth, and then you'll be right as rain, very, very quickly. But it's just getting over that first hurdle and encouraging the young guy or the young girl or adults that you can just make that first step, just have a go.
And PJ, Marn, thanks, because PJ, you would concur with what Marn says there, that I know you stay in contact with all your friends via, group chats and all that sort of stuff, but you are really missing the face-to-face physical contact, not just with your mates, but also your mates who are girls as well, or young women as well.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with what Martin was saying before. Like, it's really good and useful to have these sort of technologies here and being able to, connect with people that are, thousands of kilometers away. And that's a really good thing. But a lot of the time, it just doesn't feel right sometimes. Like, and you kind of want to reach, through the screen and be able to like pat them on the back. You just can't do that. And that's one thing I've been missing a lot, is being able to be there in person and not just being on a little call like this with a little face cam, being actually able to be there and, the presence of someone else and being in the presence of them and being able to help them and they help you. It can't be the same online. And yeah.
And just quickly, during our recent Rites of Passage camp, which was 5 days, you and I, and of course, the first thing that's done when you arrive is your phones are taken, your watches are taken, Fitbits are taken, all that sort of thing is taken, locked up, and you get it at the end. How did you feel not having your technology around?
Well, yeah, so I remember at first, for the first like 10 seconds, I was like, this is a bit weird, I don't have my phone on me, but then kind of just all fell into place and it felt all natural, waking up, whenever it was time to wake up or whenever you were woken up, you know, not waking up and checking the phone and being like, oh, you know, I can sleep for another hour. I've got class in an hour and a half or something, you know, just going with the flow. And like, it felt like we were only there for 5 days, but like by the end of the 5 days, it felt like some of the people there were just, you'd been mates with for your whole life. And you're kind of forced to, you know, communicate and talk to each other. But I feel like it was all for the better. And not having my phone there was an amazing, amazing thing.
And given you understand the benefit, how easy is it for you to replicate that when you're at home, not having technology around?
It's hard.
Yeah.
So it was there. I think this is the conclusion I came to personally. The reason I use like my phone and my computer and, you know, the TV and all that is, you know, I want to use it, but at the same time, it's because it's there and I can use it. And because I can use it, I will use it. But if I can't, you know, I might be at first like, oh, this is a bit annoying, but like it's really quick and all of a sudden you feel like a completely different person. And yeah, it's just a wonderful experience. And I have been able to replicate it a few times, but not in the same kind of field and like that same vibe as that camp we're on.
Yeah. So, you know, I think the first part to that is having some awareness around it. So that's really good. I just want to acknowledge, I've got a question here from Susan, and Susan, we'll come back and answer that shortly. So if you could just be patient, that'd be great. I just want to talk about some of the whys and why we think we are where we're at. Before I do, look, I thought of presenting all the stats around young men's mental health as far as suicide rates, as far as violence goes, as far as you know, people with mental illness. And I thought we actually all know those stats. I'm not sure we get anything more out of keep presenting. We have a problem. And so I decided not to present them. So I just want to shift into why. I want to talk a bit about, you know, the whole man box theory. And I know there's been a bunch of research out of, you know, US, UK, Mexico, and of course, I think Queensland University or somewhere up there about the man box theory. If you don't know about it, it's kind of this set of prescriptions, these cultural set of prescriptions that we grow up with about how to be a man, the pressures that places on us to behave in a certain way. And Marna, I just want to come back to you quickly because I caught up with a couple of your colleagues recently, Cookie and Mark, and something Cookie said to me really stuck with me because he was talking about some of your days where you have kind of group mentoring, where you have a bunch of your mentors and a bunch of the mentees kind of joining together in an event. And Cookie said that for some of those boys on those days, it's the very first time they've ever seen men socializing, enjoying themselves without alcohol around. And that really kind of struck me. Can you talk more about that?
Oh, Pete, we have so many challenging stories about our young guys who have never seen adults have a disagreement without yelling, things being thrown, punches and violence.
Yeah.
We've got young guys who have never seen adults enjoying themselves without alcohol, who have never seen men in a group not putting each other down constantly, who have never been in a group where they're not labelled, you know, as the fat kid, the dumb kid, you know, whatever epithet you want to have. And this is these kids gather these labels and they live with them, and that can be really hard. So we have some sort of philosophies at Menslink about you know, online just cannot replace an in-person connection. We have an absolute philosophy that we don't label any of our young fellas or any of our adult volunteers. because that can be really severely limiting. And I find the man box stuff and you know, those sort of attributes that a traditional bloke should have, they are massively amplified on media and social media. You know, and it's fascinating to see young fellas really starting to get body image problems. It was always the philosophy that it was young women who had body image problems, and they do. But the young guys are being fed a wall-to-wall diet by advertising that they're supposed to be buff and strong and go to the gym, you know, for 4 hours a day and be able to, you know, bench press and do all that sort of stuff. And I don't know about, you know, anybody here in the room, but that was not me as a kid. It's not me as an adult. But, you know, everywhere I look, whether it's TV, Netflix, social media, my phone, whatever, I just get bombarded with, here's what you're supposed to look like, here's how you're supposed to act. And it's very difficult to get away from. So as a young person, you start to go, who am I? And it's really hard.
Yeah.
And a lot of the work we do at Menslink is, and I know, you know, the rite of passage stuff that you guys have been on with Arnie Rubenstein, a lot of it is trying to anchor young fellas in who they are, not who they're supposed to be, or not what other people tell them they are.
Yeah, no, that's true. And Amar, you know, you have, I think you've previously been international headsman at Mankind Project and also in your practice there. I'm guessing you see these kind of external pressures playing out in people's lives.
Yeah, very much so. Well, I think, you know, I think what Martin shared, I think everything you've shared, Martin, has been really appropriate and relevant. And that last point you made around contrasting man box theory and the pressure that is kind of culturally out there for young men with the kind of environment men of all ages get, but young men in particular get at a rite of passage is really, you know, significant. So I think I would say probably around 20 to 30% of the men that come into the Mankind Project in Canberra, you know, fresh or new, would do so because they're looking to understand some kind of emotional problem or external event that's happened, and not having the emotional range internally to learn how to deal with it. And that is often cultural, although I think we can add to that familial as well. And sort of the collapse of the tribe and into the nuclear family has meant that there may not be access to the kind of elders. And Lockie spoke to kinship structure and so on. So I think certainly, I think rite of passages seem to be filling that need successfully out there. And then, of course, the structure of organizations like Menslink, where there is a mentoring environment, is also really necessary to provoke young men to be able to perhaps look at themselves differently. I mean, there's, you know, the reference to anchoring in self. And I think the other side of that is really the provocation of challenging what's out there. The other thing that's actually starting to creep in that it's peripheral, but I think we may see it increase over time, is also gender identity and men's work, and seeing how this, you know, what happens in the future as this rolls on, because I don't think gender is now as strongly polarized as it was. And so I think with that depolarization, we're getting a lot more nuance in the conversation. And potentially one of the challenges that offers up for the space holders is also staying really alive to the lived reality of younger people, where they are growing up in a way, in a space where there is a bit more freedom for expression or freedom for exploration. And also, you know, us as space holders or people of an older generation, not limiting that exploration or not limiting it inadvertently, even if it is, you know, with the best of intentions.
Yeah. No, I think that's really interesting. it's actually got me thinking, because I was listening to a podcast last night around gender identity, and I think the point you make about being a person who's holding the space and doing so without judgment, and making it safe for them to express and explore that as they feel right is really important. And Lockie, I just want to come to you quickly, because all these kind of man box pressures to be a man, you probably see it on steroids. Elite sports world, I don't mean physically on steroids, but as a metaphor, you would see all this on steroids, I would think.
Yeah, it's actually I've been a little bit numb to it, because I think as an athlete, you kind of like I felt a bit. I've been exploring that identity myself a lot recently. As a I'm a 31-year-old. I just became a dad, and I think I'm still exploring this conversation with myself. Like, as an athlete, as a kayaker, I'm naturally, part of my profession at the time was being super ripped, big shoulders, strong as all hell. And that was my identity, and that's who I am. So understand, and then I'm unpacking a lot now, like, what was the drive? Was it me being an elite athlete, or was it actually me trying to fit into that mass? And this is something I'm still grappling with. I'm reading this book at the moment, and I'm blown away. It's called Man Enough, and I'm blown away how kind of this guy is so obsessive around his being so sculptured as his body, and how much pressure he felt. For me as an athlete, I didn't necessarily. It was just part of what I did, and someone facilitated that for me, my coach. But it's interesting now. So it's very it's front of mind for me a lot now, still exploring that. If there's any young people listening into that, I don't think I'm exploring that myself at the moment. But just to follow up on the point around creating that safe space to check in on people, I think it's kind of pressing with what we've been discussing, Peter, and what we do with iYarn. What we're finding, we work in a lot of schools around the country, and the challenge that teachers have is there's so much need on the teachers now. There's on a variety of different challenges, but how do you create the safe spaces for these young people to check in? We're not all fortunate enough to be out on country for 5-day rite of passage programs where with mobiles taken off, we're in a cocoon for that rite of passage experience. But my question has always been, how do we create these safe spaces in our day-to-day lives for people to share and check in? So that's always been my kind of North Star. And that's what we try to facilitate with iYarn, with the platform, because some kids in classroom, for years when I was at school, and I know my old man was at school, you'd have like form group as part of partial care before you go to the school kind of day starts. You kind of with a group of 20 people, other people at some schools. And that time is meant to be time to check in, get ready for the day. But I remember my whole school experience was playing cards and talking turkey with your mates. But and what we're finding now is actually that's a great time to create the safe space and check in on each other.
Yeah, great. And I've been fortunate enough to use the app that you're talking about, iYarn app. I'm going to get you to demo it shortly, so everyone stay tuned there. PJ, I just want to come to you quickly, because I just want to talk about the pressures that you see for being a man. And I recall a conversation we had during our Rites of Passage camp, because you said at that stage, and correct me if things have changed, but you said you don't feel those pressures so much. Do you want to just talk about that quickly?
Yeah, I remember that conversation. I remember that what we were talking about, and I feel still similar. There's definitely like pressures and stuff, a lot more now that I've actually started work, but I haven't had like this massive pressure of needing to be, buff and needing to be a man, strong, doesn't cry, plays sports, goes on runs, all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I also have had like pressures of not being like just a small little boy that, isn't strong, and, but there's definitely some of that. And, but
sorry, mate, it's the genetics.
Yeah, thanks. But it's, it's not that important to me.
Yeah. No. And it was interesting conversation, because you raised this, and then one of the other boys in the group said, or because you were suggesting that maybe the generations have moved on and it's not such an issue. And one of the boys in our group said, actually, PJ, it's a daily issue for me. And he went to a private boys' school, and he said, everything we do, we feel this pressure of needing to prove ourselves to be a man. So it's interesting. And look, I've just had my birthday. I'm 57 now. I'm a bit like you. I didn't really feel that pressure. I remember I saw it out there. It probably impacted me for a little bit, but there was certainly a time in the late 80s when I was quite happy playing rugby with my mates, and then going down the gym, putting my leotard on, and giving an aerobics class. So I don't know, but okay. So I think for some people it's definitely still around. I'm just conscious of time. We want to get on to some of our programs. I wanted to talk about trauma, and something I've read a fair bit about recently is, and Amar, I might come to you again, is just that this idea that parents parent out of their childhood trauma, and how you see that playing out with people that you might see.
Well, I mean, I would agree with that. Firstly, I think it's the culture around, I guess I'd call it almost psychological labor of confronting trauma and working through it. As I said, trauma being an automatic survival response. Then given that there's so much conditioning of the nervous system that happens in young human beings between 0 and 4 years of age, children not being really able to understand sophisticated words that parents use, but certainly having an embodied experience of what's going on around them and kind of taking that on. Those sorts of experiences certainly shape the tone of the nervous system as we move through. And, the way I tend to work as a somatic therapist is really working with the body and sort of bottom up. So from the body, looking at where the dysregulation is, where the anxiety is, and also top down. So, also acknowledging the power of story. So to bring that back to parents and parents leading from trauma, again, I would say that this to me picks up stuff around culture, both good and challenging. It picks up issues around religion and belief systems, around, gender identity, sexuality. I mean, all these incredibly rich and important domains of being can be shaped by traumatic events. And so depending on the conditioning parents have, there is definitely trauma patterning that I'll see working with families. That's an incredibly rewarding and privileged position to be in if people are in an environment where an entire family looks at some of the patterns that are there, rather than pointing the finger at individuals in that family unit. Then there's a huge opportunity there for growing as a group and maturing as a group. I'm hearing even you, Peter, sharing with PJ, being able to be with him on a rite of passage, and there's a delicate balance there of wanting this human that you're stewarding through life to have his own experience, and also wanting to give him the best of care and attention that you can. So, I think one of the best things, and this ties back to what I said earlier, there's technique for sure that we can deploy as mental health professionals or even as parents. There's books that can be read, but one of the most powerful things an elder can do, or an older person can do for a young person, is to actually work through their own trauma. So I think creating more of a dialogue around that. Some of the addiction recovery work I do, if there's a young person and a parent kind of has the view, fix the child, it's, well, actually the process of health and well-being begins with that attitude that you've got that's saying, fix this child. So, I think, this is a huge issue, and we could kind of go with it in many ways, but that's kind of a broad stroke.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And Karen and Susan questions, we're going to get to those shortly, and Matthew there as well. And I just wanted to acknowledge what you were saying there, Amar, because it was interesting. I went into the rites of passage with PJ, understanding that the parenting style that had got to me to where we were there wasn't going to be the parenting style going forward. And I'm quite aware of some of my childhood traumas. You know, I lost my mother when I was 11, and I can see how that plays out in my parenting. And so, you know, PJ and I, even though we're separated by distance, we've got an extremely close relationship. And I knew at that time, and it was quite an emotional thing for me. PJ would nod his head there. It was a struggle to get my words out around it. Certainly brought a lot of tears, but I knew the style of relationship had to change. One from maybe away from quantity to more quality, because PJ's developing more relationships with friend groups. He's taking on, you know, casual work. He's got his girlfriend and all that sort of thing. And so I knew my kind of, you know, style of parenting had to change. And that was, you know, a bit of an emotional thing for me, because it had met my needs. You know, it had met my needs and that need for intimacy that I guess I didn't have when, you know, my mother died when I was 11. And I just want to, you know, find out why, and we've talked about it already. We've talked about this, you know, for most of our history as humans, we've been hunter-gatherers. We've lived in communities. You know, parenting was shared between aunties and uncles. You know, there were lots of role models for young men to call on, and there was a kind of a safety net. And I think, you know, another thing I've been reading a lot about is this, you know, attachment theory, this, what's it called? The circle of security. That, you know, if anyone's had children, they've probably seen this model around circle of security where, you know, you are this kind of consistent place, and your toddlers kind of go out and explore the world, and they have this safe space to come back to. And what I've been reading about is that it was never meant to be a model just around young children. It was actually meant to be a model that extended way through childhood into teenagers' years. And I feel that this is becoming a bit of a speech and not a question. But anyway, I acknowledge that. I feel that for many parents, when their children start attaching themselves to their peers, there's great relief, you know, because they get some of their life back and they can go off with their friends. And I think that stage when peers matter more than parents, and Lockie, you touched on this as well, is when some of the, you know, when we start seeing the dangers, you know, when adults, when the parents start not having that influence over their children. I think, you know, that's a bit of a warning sign. And certainly in my own life, whether I had a breakup with a girlfriend or something, I still had that stable father to come back and, you know, share with. And I felt that security. And for lots of young men, they just don't have that anymore for whatever reason. Amar, I think you were wanting to say something. I saw you reach forward.
Oh, no, look, I mean, there were so many different things. I'd also saw Martin earlier, just had his hand up as we were talking about this stuff.
Look, sorry, mate, I missed that, so I'll come to Martin after you. Yeah.
Oh no, I'm good. I'm good. Like I said, I
Martin,
think we can go soon.
You know, thanks, Martin.
I would think I was just responding to Amar's comments around trauma, and one of the really common things that we see in our world is we have a lot of single mums who have been through a very traumatic relationship breakdown. Unfortunately, in our world, that's quite often has involved violence. And what we've found is that both mum and their son have now got a level of PTSD, and often it's untreated. And I'll tell a story of a woman, I'll call her Sandra, that's my wife's name, and she rang up because her son had run away, and there was a minor argument about him putting his phone on the kitchen table, and it went from 0 to 100 really, really quickly. And anyway, he ran out and she hadn't seen him for 2 weeks. And I'm working with this girl, Sandra, and after a long while, it came out that she had been through a domestic violence situation, and something that her then 14-year-old son had said triggered her. And that's when it went to 100. And when she went to 100, it triggered him because he lived through that violence as well. And he went to 110. And I never forget her saying to me, Marty, I'm never going to let a man talk to me like that again. And I had to say, I really appreciate that. But he's 14. He's actually your little boy, and he's experienced the same trauma that you have. And I think that was a bit of a revelation for her. She hadn't worked out that emotional connection in her brain. Logically, she did, but she hadn't worked out emotionally that in her brain. And we see that a lot, you know, that challenge in parenting. So thanks for bringing that up, Amar.
Yeah. No, and it raises for me, and we won't have time to talk about because we do have to move on, but it raises for me, you know, something we talk about in Rites of Passage a lot is that, you know, through those teenage years, we have boys who are growing physically into men, but often retain a lot of the boy-like behaviours. You know, and if we look around the world and look at politicians, we see this clearly throughout the world. It's a real big problem. And of course, then you get that power imbalance between, you know, masculine and feminine, which is, you know, incredibly challenging as well. So just want to acknowledge that.
Yeah, if I could just jump in there, because I think one point before we move on is that, as I said, you know, for me, it's a kind of personal crusade to really destigmatize the word trauma. It's not a dirty word. It's not a statement of lacking capacity. It is a survival behavior that becomes automatic over time. As I said, and I've said it before, but I want to emphasize it, that it's so easy to mistake my trauma responses for my personality. And to know that being able to move through trauma is a birthright. It's not a death sentence. It's just difficult because it's kind of, you know, how do I become aware of things I'm not aware of? And it takes a lot of courage to begin to kind of go there. So, you know, I just think what Martin you shared, it's so beautiful and tragic to go on that journey with a family unit and begin to kind of restore a sense of goodness and reconnection where at no point were they angry at each other, you know, but that relationship suffers. So I just, it's just I feel very personally, passionately about it. So anyway, thanks, Pete.
It's a good point. I recently saw a beautiful movie called The Wisdom of Trauma by Dr. Gabor Mate. I don't know if you've heard of him, Amar, or what you think of him, but I remember one thing he said when he was working with addicts in Vancouver, I think, and he'd meet them and they'd talk about their lives, and he'd say, and you know, they were taking drugs to cope with it, and he'd say, congratulations for finding a way of surviving, you know, and it wasn't just a glib comment, that was what he truly believed. So
yeah, no, Gabor Mate's work is amazing, and he's got a modality that he's developed, compassionate inquiry, which is really solid work as well. No, he's great.
No, I love him. That thing around peer orientation, I take that out of his book. No, I've got it over there. I can't remember what it's called, but it's all about having to matter more than peers. So let's just quickly move over to some of the solutions, because I'm really conscious of time. We could talk for a while. And Lockie, I wanted to come to you because, you know, some of the challenges we see with men, we often hear about is, you know, men being able to have, you know, real conversations, real deep conversations, you know, how to kind of check in with mates without, you know, we were talking about before, without kind of constant joking around, that sledging. And a lot of this is what's motivated you to create this app, iYarn. Did you want to just talk about the app a bit and also maybe demonstrate it quickly?
Yeah, I guess, you know, my experience going through, I've been very fortunate to connect with quite intimately with a fair few on Noongar Budja. This is where I grew up in the southwest of WA, but then in the last decade, more so in Bardi, people up on the northwest of WA. And they have this word called iYarn. And iYarn is a word for your body, your emotion, your mind, your spirit, your everything, pretty much. And so when after doing a bit of work in the community for a number of years, I got culturally adopted by the Ijai family, which is a family in the Bardi community. And I really led into understanding that culture a bit more, and the word what iYarn meant. And essentially what it means is, like, whenever you go back into community, you haven't seen your kid and your family for a while, they say, oh, Binjali, Gurunai iYarn, my name's Binjali. And it says, like, how's your iYarn? And when someone says that word, how's your iYarn, it instantly creates that safe space for you to check in with that person, because you've got like so much context behind the word iYarn. So if someone asks you, it's really, you've got to create that safe space and share what's really going on. Do you have a heavy iYarn? You're feeling a bit down now? Or do you have a light iYarn? You're feeling good, you're feeling strong, you're feeling deadly. So for me, I got growled at one time when my mum up there asked me, how's my iYarn? And I kind of brushed her off a bit like a typical white fella, Westerner. Oh yeah, good mum, thanks. I'm going spearfishing now, catch ya. And then I came back, got some feed, and came back all proud about myself and all that. And then next minute she growled at me, she really, real humbling. She said, Lockie, that's not culture, that's, disrespectful, blah, blah. And I was like, far out. And it was a real awakening that I needed for someone to be honest with me and really give me that feedback when she said how my iYarn, and I didn't really create that safe space. And, sadly, we've all had experiences where, we know people who've been impacted by mental health and suicide. And so we really need to check in and create that safe space. So my solution to doing that is just creating a platform that makes that easy and doesn't have too much friction with doing that check-in. Here's a bit of an example of what it looks like. Essentially, it's a life wheel. What you do, here's an example in the school environment that may imagine at the beginning of the term, you can see all the students, how they've gone. This is the average of everyone in the term. You can see each individual's comments. But the idea is you simply go through and you're giving yourself a score, low or high, in all these different areas you want to check in on. And what essentially happens at the beginning of the school week or middle of the week, they'll just do a bit of a check-in, and the kid will do a self-assessment, and they can write in a bit of a comment, and then that'll be completed. And what the teacher has the ability to do is actually able to see each individual student as they go. You can see here Noel Brown, you can see here the beginning of the term, it was really low, but at the end of the term, things have grown up. And the idea, what we're finding is really useful for a lot of these young people, is that they can see where they've been and where they're at now. And that in themselves, seeing where they've gone to where they are now, that builds up that mental resilience. And they see, hey, I've been down like this before, back here, but I got back. I got back on the bike and I managed to build up that resilience and that. So, this is a tool that we've created. It's used in a number of schools and community organisations to check in on young people for mentoring. We've got a few more like advanced features there, but the idea is that you can actually create your own wheel. You just go through, and those segments that I've got there, like that one had Noongar language, but you can actually just create whatever you want, fully customizable to whatever you're working on and want to focus on with that young person you want to do. So that's iYarn in a nutshell. I don't want to take anyone else's their time, but yeah, it's a way to get the beauty of it is a way to have quick and easy check-ins, and over time that data helps you paint a bit of a better picture around how the young people you're working with are faring, and that can help you make better decisions around resourcing, but then also it helps facilitate those safe spaces for the young person who may not have the language to talk about these things, but they can put a number on where they're at with those areas of life they want to check in on. And then that can help them lean in to say, you could, as a facilitator, as a coach, mentor, parent, you could say, oh, well, I see you're a 4 now for that. It's obvious that that's a bit low. So, as a parent, you can just ask empowering open questions like, what could I do to support you? Or what do you think you could do to maybe increase that for you right now? So that's iYarn.
Yeah, fantastic. That must have been the quickest presentation you've ever done.
Nice yeah. I'm good at spinning a yarn, but yeah, I hope people got a bit of a picture there around the tool, and something really passionate, and very appreciative of your support, Peter.
Yeah, no, I think you did a great job. I could see Martin leaning right in, having a good look. So either he was interested or he's short-sighted. I'm not sure. or maybe both. Yeah, he's giving a thumbs up there. I'm going to come to each of our other participants. Just going to go through some of the questions quickly, which we probably don't have time to answer each individual one, but if you guys could kind of keep them in mind as you're talking. And Lockie, I just invite you to maybe in the comment section, both on social media and also on Zoom, maybe just put in your contact details, link to your website and all that sort of stuff. So there's a question from Susan saying, "Hi, I'm a mental health mental health social worker who only occasionally sees young men. What's some good things that agencies and individual workers can do to make young men feel comfortable and understand from the moment they enter a service?" Alicia had to leave, and yes, it will be. Todd had to leave. Matthew says, "How do we reach young men where they're at before the need for social integration intervention, especially the proportion yet too hesitant to seek support?" Yeah, so how do we get to them early on? Sherry says, "Is anyone able to speak more about the different world young people are living in today compared to the world those of us who are older lived in when we were teenagers, and how is this potentially impacting emotional, mental well-being, and how we should be tackling this difference when working with young people and their parents and carers?" So with all that in mind, I might come to you, Martin. If you want to see a program that works really well with young boys, I would say Menslink. You got to take a look at Menslink. Can you just tell us a bit more about the mentoring program and the results that you're seeing?
Yeah, Pete, and I'll try and answer all of those questions by talking really fast.
In 5 minutes, yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, with Sherry, possibly the exception of the one about the different world, because I think that's the subject of a whole hour and a half in itself. It really is. But in a couple of the others, I think for us, we go and get older guys with some lived experience who know how to story tell, and we go into schools and sporting clubs and community groups and wherever we can go and talk to young fellas in their language, and we normalise the fact that all of us have got problems. We don't teach, we don't preach, but we tell stories, because for a bazillion years, storytelling has been the way we pass down wisdom, and that's how we do it. When we then go into question time, and when we started some of these programs, we would have some footies, and we'd give footies out to the best questions. And what that meant is the cool kids, the tough kids, would ask the questions because they wanted the footies or whatever the prize was. And then the other kids would go, "Well, this guy asked a pretty serious question and nobody laughed at him." And by that, we just started to create the safe space that it was okay to talk. So you start with somebody telling a story about hardship in their life, a mate, losing a mate, times, hey, I've been down the pointy end in terms of attempted suicide and all of those sort of things, relationship breakdowns, bullying at school or whatever, and tell those stories. And then I think in terms of other questions we have, and I do a lot of training for Lifeline in how to deal with guys who ring up Lifeline but don't want to talk. And one of the things that we've learned at Menslink is you don't often, if a guy doesn't want to talk, asking him about his feelings is often really difficult, because he might feel bad but not be able to describe it. He might not have that level of emotional ability to articulate what those emotions are, but he'll be able to tell you what happened. So, mate, why are you here? Is there something that happened to you that we could give you some advice, or you want some advice on? And that's a good way just to start that conversation and make it feel safe for the young guy. So, looking at that storytelling, that yarning, where young guys gather, whether that's sporting clubs or wherever, schools, and then also just trying to talk a little bit about events, not feelings, and making it normal that, we all go through tough times. And the fact you're going through a tough time today doesn't mean you're not going to be okay tomorrow or next week or next month. Or if you're okay today, something might happen. So let's establish those relationships that are going to be really critical for you if things take a slump in the future.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Martin. PJ, what Martin was saying just reminded me something in the rites of passage. It's around the sharing of stories. Some of those are mythical stories, but some of them are just personal stories. And you experience that kind of sense of safety to be able to share those stories. Do you recall, some of the things that the facilitators did to make those times safe for people to share?
Yeah, I remember just the feeling of the ceremony around it, that kind of tribal, with the teepee, and you all go in, you go into you go around the circle, oldest first, and it goes all the way around the circle, and just that, and the fire in the middle, and the talking stick, and all these things, it made it feel important and formal, but also comfortable and relaxing, as opposed to just getting everyone to sit down in the middle of nowhere and just say, all right, what's going on? Who's feeling this way? You know what I mean? And
yeah,
that sort of making it more, not important, more I don't know how to.
So there was a sense of, there's a sense of ceremony around it, a sense of sacredness that we've kind of lost from Western society a lot. And I don't mean a religious sacredness, but if you've been religious, I was brought up a Catholic, you sort of understand that. There's something special about that. What else do you think made it safe?
Just the way they handled it. They started with, sometimes they started with stories, sometimes they started with their own personal problems and things they've had to deal with. And then, the people that were not stronger, but were more able to speak, spoke first. And that kind of made everyone else more comfortable to speak. And, just felt like 2 hours went by in a minute.
And I see sorry, mate. I see a comment from Lisa saying, sounds like a sense of purpose to the gathering or meeting can make it safe. Yeah, it can. So some of the other things were, confidentiality. So what was said isn't talked about outside that group or when you go home. Of course, there's some exceptions there around self-harm and child protection, of course, but that was really important. There's this encouragement to talk from the I, so I feel this way, I see this thing, what it means to me is this. And so that gets you away from philosophizing, gets you away from telling people how to live their life and just modeling it. The other thing is just, and this can be really hard for men to do, is not add on to people's stories when they tell them, and not kind of just do that kind of little joke that you always do with your mates. It's just no room for that. And it's a great way of creating that safe space. I'll just finish up talking about rites of passage in a sec, but I'll just go back to you, Amar. So we hear this term, you got to do the work. You got to do the work. What is doing the work when someone comes to you look like? And I'm sure it's going to vary greatly, but if you want to just talk to that quickly.
Yeah, okay. I think in a nutshell, the work is creating an environment where the person who's going to do the work feels safe enough to accept the truths and aspects of themselves from which they want to recoil. And that's really it in a nutshell, because it's about the unacknowledged truth, the unintegrated experience, the unmetabolized relationship. that actually shapes or causes calluses, and ends up taking people off in a direction. So, and it's also holistic, I would say. It's thought. It's so it's where my thoughts are at, or where someone's thoughts are at. It's where their emotions are at, and it's also where their instinctive and embodied experience is. What their anxiety is, what their emotional life is. And I can see that you've got something to do. I just wanted to add on to that in terms of the conversation that was going on earlier. I think a couple of the things I think all the suggestions were great. I reckon a couple of points that I'd want to add is that, the mental health challenges facing young men don't just belong to mental health, to men. I think that this is a cultural, holistic challenge where actually what we can do to support moving it is actually see it not as a problem to fix, but in a conversation in which to participate. The other thing that I've seen that can work quite well is not all work with men is best done separate. Like there's definitely a place for men's business and men working together. But we've, through one of the companies that I'm part owner of, we've run an Indigenous leadership program in the Mallee. And there we were running co-gender circles. And it was actually extremely powerful for both genders to be able to explore in that safe space. So I guess the caveat here is the safe space was created before bringing them together, and then being able to ask questions or explore issues and have that facilitated by adults. And the third piece that I just wanted to raise is, again, it's an extension of that ownership of the discourse, not kind of seeing young men as having problems. But I think there's and this ties into the question you initially kind of asked me around what does doing the work looks like. I think it's about us as space holders growing into the kind of people that others want to be around, and it kind of picks up on what Martin is saying, not moralizing, not preaching, but actually listening and from a space of non-judgment, being able to kind of see whether there's openness, and if there isn't, understanding that sometimes, like just marinating in a caring environment will soften the next conversation. And that's, again, taking away that idea that, this person's come to me with this problem, I need to kind of solve it all immediately or else I'm a failure, because that then creates an agenda. And what any human wants, regardless of age, is actually to have an authentic moment with someone. So I think, being cognizant of all of this, learning the problems, learning the language, and then letting it all go and just being with these young humans or younger humans is kind of the way forward.
Yeah, thanks for raising that bit about co-gender circles, because that's something I've been passionate about, and certainly in with the groups that I've been involved with through the Rites of Passage Institute. We've been talking about this recently. My motivation came from watching PJ in his friendship circles and how he has this great group of friends. He goes to a co-ed school and a great group of friends that are both young men and young women, and it's a really respectful group. And I look at it in a little bit of awe, because I didn't have that growing up. I went to a Catholic boys' school. We came out of the end of school still not knowing how to talk to women. Because we didn't have any intimacy, and I don't mean intimacy from a sexual point of view, but there was no intimacy from a relationship point of view. So you could only but objectify to some degree, because you just didn't have that relationship. So I think that's incredibly important. Our Rites of Passage camps that I'll talk about shortly aren't co-ed, but it's something I started off wanting, but then just logistically, not only keeping it emotionally safe, but keeping it physically safe was just a bit beyond me as we start these programs off. But we're certainly keen to do that. So thanks. I really think that's important.
Well, I think things like rites of passage, they're an ending of one phase of being and then a growing into a new one, and the work continues. So I think, that's why I said before, doing co-gender work, creating a sense of safety inside the self, which means potentially doing this work together as men and as women, and then broadening it to come together is kind of the way to go.
Yeah, love that. So I'll just quickly talk about our program. So Reconnected is our Rites of Passage camp. Our next one is in April. And Esther, if you're still watching, if you could just put in the link. And as I'm talking, Martin and Amar, if you've got stuff where people can find you or links to any programs that you're running, if you could just put it in the comment section, that'd be great too. But rites of passage, and we could talk about this for an hour and a half, but it's a place for transformation. There's the sharing of stories, which we've heard quite a lot through this discussion today. It's a way of sharing knowledge, of modeling behaviors without telling people how to live their life. We have challenges for the boys, not only the boys, but the men as well. That helps them to identify resources that they might have internally that they can take on, outside of that rite of passage. There's time for contemplation and visioning about how they want to adult in the world going forward, and a chance to start making some commitments for change. I can feel my voice going again because I'm talking about honouring PJ. There's an opportunity for the men to recognise the strengths in the boys. So the father will get up and talk about what they witness in their son, and then another man from the community might get up and talk about that boy as well. And my voice always cracks because it wasn't a hard thing for me to do, but I could not get my words out. I was incredibly emotional, and I'm not sure I've tapped into why that is, so Amar, I might have to look you up. But it was such a beautiful ceremony. And I think, as when our boys and our girls are little, we give them a lot of feedback. But then as they grow and start becoming independent, I think sometimes we forget to tell them, about the strengths that they have. So very special time. And then we look at reintegrating because, the work's got to continue outside that kind of 4 or 5 days, as Amar just said. So, it's a really special process. If anyone's interested, I think Esther's probably put up the links. Let me have a look. Yes, she has. Good job. We're also recently in a newspaper article that tells you a bit more, and Esther, you might put the link up to that. And also, I interviewed PJ after our Rites of Passage camp, and it goes for 45 minutes. It gives a lot more depth and understanding about the process and the experience from the boys and the father's point of view, not me as a facilitator. So, look, thanks for everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm just looking at the time. That's been an hour and 20 minutes, so it's probably time to wrap up. I hope we've been able to answer some of those questions. I really appreciate everyone joining us. I think this is important work to continue, as Amar has mentioned. And, so I'm going to end the streaming to Facebook now. We might hang around a bit to say goodbye. If any other questions come up, we might take the time to respond to that. Lockie, I was just seeing you shaking. Did you want to say something, or are you just saying goodbye, eh?
Border, goodbye. Until
Cool.
next time.
PJ, I might just finish it with you quickly, mate. What, what's motivated you? No, what am I trying to say? What are you motivated to do around this kind of men's mental health space? And you don't have to be motivated at all. But what are you thinking around this space?
Oh, there's a lot of things I'm motivated about. But one thing that Amar said before that really stood out to me that I kind of just realized what I've realized but haven't really thought about it is you said that it's more about not making it like everyone has, you have a problem and I need to fix it. But this kind of making it normal and making it normal to not be okay, making it okay to not be okay. And I feel like so many, including me, so many teens, teenagers, even adults, children need to know that, because let's be honest, no one's perfect and living their life. Like everyone's living their life, but no one's got no problem at all and nothing that can't be talked about. And I think that's really important. And I feel like that's why I kind of want to be there to listen, to help, but not to feel like I need to fix it. I just want to be able to listen and to just be there for people. That's my motivation.
Thanks, mate. I think some very wise words. Appreciate that. Thanks to the panel. We'll just stay online shortly. Also, thanks to Esther, who's been running behind the scenes. I really appreciate your support during this. And thanks for everyone in listening and watching in today. And I'm just about to stop the live stream.